This is going to be a longer video than usual, but I want to show an example of one of the impressive things you can do in Altair using interactivity. So I've loaded this Penguins data frame here, and I've named it Penguin instead of the usual df. And I'm loading it from the Seaborn library, but we won't use Seaborn for anything else in this video. And so let me go ahead and make a starting Altair chart. So let me do Altair.chart. The data frame is called Penguin, so that's what I have to use here. And now this is going to be a scatter plot, so I'm going to use mark circle. And then for encoding, and let me just get easy access to these column names. So I'm going to say penguin.columns. And this will give me, I almost said list, but I probably shouldn't call it a list. This will give me a pandas index, which I think of as a list of the different column names. So let's have bill length for the x coordinate. And let's have flipper length for the y coordinate. Okay, and let's add some color for the species. So we'll say color equals species. You can tell sometimes I use double quotes, sometimes I use single quotes. It would probably be better for me to be consistent, but it's fine to go with either of those. And I'd rather us be zoomed in a little more. So let me do this in two different ways just to show you some of the options. So I can say alt.x. Hey, so far this hasn't changed anything. It'll look the same. But now I can add in this scale keyword and say scale is going to be alt.scale and then 0 equals false. And so what this is saying is that for the x direction, don't require it to show 0. And let me do it a little differently for y, just to show you one of the other possibilities. So I'm still going to say scale equals alt.scale. But now instead of saying 0 equals false, let me say domain equals. And let's go from 160 to 240. So here I'm putting this in a tuple. I could also put it in a list. Okay, so now we go from 160 up to 240. So that's just two different ways. This way, all I say is 0 should be false, and then by default, Altair zooms in as far as it can. This way, I'm saying explicitly what the domain should be in the y direction. Okay, good. And so let me save this. So this whole thing is an Altair chart. And I'll call it C, or maybe I'll call it C1. And so if I were to check what's the type of C1, it's going to tell me this is an Altair chart. Yeah, Altair chart. Okay, good. And now if I just type C1 by itself, I get that same chart again. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to make what's called a selection interval. And this, by convention, is often called brush. So let me say brush equals alt.selection interval. Okay, whatever that is. And now let me say c1.add selection brush. So this is saying to the chart, I want to add a selection. What selection do I want to add? I want to add this brush. So it looks exactly the same, but now I can select like this. So if I try to come up here and do that, nothing's happening. Okay, well, still pretty boring, but here's the implications of this. Let me do C2 equals alt.chart, still penguin. This one is going to be a bar chart. So mark bar dot encode. And then let me say that x is going to be for the species. And let me say that y is going to be, and now this is a special special terminology that I'm about to use. If I look at penguin.columns, hey, these are the different choices of columns. I'm going to put something else, which is called count. Okay, so notice that that's not one of these columns here. And so what does this do? So because I assigned it to a variable, it doesn't show me anything. But if I type C2 down here, it'll show me. And so this count, it's like an abbreviation that says, tell me how many there are of each of these species. Okay, cool. And why don't we add the color for the species also? So color equals species. Need to put it in quotation marks like a string. Okay, good. And now let's try some other shorthand. C1 vertical line, so the same thing you would use for OR, okay, this thing that's sometimes called pipe. C1 vertical line, C2. Okay, and so now we have these two things, and if I like try to click and drag here, nothing's happening. And why is that? Like, why did the selection go away? Well, notice that up here when I said C1.add selection brush, notice that it showed the image here. So that's a sign that I didn't actually change C1. If I want to change C1, then let's see, maybe I'll do it down below. So I'll say C1 equals. Okay, now let me execute this again. And now I have this selection. Okay, fine. And let me get this C2 back. And I'll put it here. And now here's something totally new we're going to do. I'm going to say transform filter brush. And so what that is saying is anything that was not selected, don't show that. So let me show you what happens. Oh, and I should reevaluate this. So do you see how those bars are moving around? And one other thing I could do is I could specify the domain here so that it's always at the maximum height. So let me say alt.y, and then I'll say scale equals alt.scale, and domain equals 0 to 160. Okay, now I have to execute this again. That's what I forgot the previous time. And now do you see how the bounds are not bouncing around anymore? And if you want to make sure that you keep these three here, like notice how now it's down to just a width 1 bar chart. Well, I can do the same sort of thing as specifying the domain. So here I say alt.x scale equals alt.scale, domain equals. And now it's a little tricky because what should go here? Like putting numbers here doesn't make sense anymore. So it should be something like a list of these three, or a tuple maybe of these three. I don't know which you would prefer, probably list. So let me get those. So let me say penguin.species. Okay, and if I want to remove all the duplicates, one way to do that is I can say .unique. And now let's just try that and see if that works as the domain. I don't think it will. Oh, okay, it didn't give me an error, so maybe that does work. And now let's see. If I make the selection, and now let's like move it over here. So do you see how it's still showing all three of these? What I was expecting to have to do was to wrap it inside of list, but I didn't have to. So yeah, I hope that's an example of some of the powerful things you can do using Altair. Another thing to say about it is this is all happening in JavaScript here. So that once you've created something like this, you can embed it onto an HTML page, and you don't need to have Python running in the background, which is hard to get for static web pages. Okay, yeah, that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching.